Hello and welcome. My name is Alex Romero from the GASB Learning Solutions. On this nano, we are going to be looking at the recently issued GASB 104, Disclosures of Certain Capital Assets. So first we're going to take a look at the background to see where we've come from to get to needing to have GASB 104. So GASB 34 requires that certain information regarding capital assets to be presented by major class. So we have had long-lived non-financial assets classified as capital assets and also the inclusion of intangible assets in the definition of capital assets. So after we had the issuance and implementation of GASB 87 for leases, GASB 94 for public-private and public-public partnerships, and GASB 96 subscriptions, this led to intangible right-to-use assets to be classified as capital assets and were subject to Statement 34. So the board decided that they wanted to take a closer look at this. In June of 2022, they put it as a pre-agenda research activity. A year later, in June 2021, they came back and they found that the non-financial assets are really prevalent in the government financial statement, but that users were evaluating the information differently. So the GASB decided to add a project for the classification of non-financial assets in August of 2021. The exposure draft for this GASB 104 was issued in September 2023, and there were 27 comments that came in, and those really helped shape those suggestions, and those comments really contributed and helped shape the development of the final GASB 104. So what is the objective and scope of this recently issued GASB? So it just came out in September 2024, and the objective is to provide users of government financial statements with essential information about certain types of capital assets. So the scope is going to include that the statement establishes requirements for certain types of capital assets, note disclosures that are required under GASB Statement number 34, and it also establishes requirements for capital assets that are held for sale. And so this is going to include additional disclosures for those specific capital assets that are held for sale. And the requirement of this statement also is going to be applied to both state and local governments. So let's look at the first part of this. So we need to see about the separate disclosures of certain capital assets. So within the note disclosures, we're going to have certain areas that we are going to have disclosed separately these different items. So GASB 87 lease assets, they're going to be reported by major class of the underlying asset. So for instance, you'll have leased, and then you'd have maybe buildings, equipment. So they'll be clumped together in that respect. They'll be under leased, but then they're going to be classed and grouped together based on what their underlying asset is. For GASB number 94, intangible right-to-use assets, again, they're going to be reported by major class of now the underlying public-public partnership asset. And GASB 96, those subscription assets are going to be separate and disclosed separately as well. Now, for all other intangible assets that are outside of GASB 87, 94, and 96, they are going to be disclosed by major class of assets. So you think of software, easements, some rights like water or mineral rights. So here is an example of what those disclosures will look like. So I've highlighted here the software line. Then you can see the leased assets and the descriptions of building where they're all clumped together, and then equipment. And then we have our subscription assets underneath that. Then the next section down is showing the accumulated depreciation for all those different types of capital assets. So the next area in GASB 104 is capital assets held for sale. So a capital asset is going to be deemed held for sale if it has two things. First, that the government has decided to pursue the sale of that asset, and is a really important word here. That's why it's highlighted and in all caps. It is also needs to be likely that that capital asset is going to be sold by 1 year from the financial statement date. So if you issue the financial statements on July 1st, you have to have it so that it's likely that that capital asset is going to be sold and everything finalized by a year from that financial date of July 1st. So to really kind of come to if this is going to be a probable sale, you need to have some different considerations of those assets. So first one we're going to think about is the asset available for immediate sale right now in its present condition? Or do we need to do some improvements or something else to get it so that it's ready to sell, therefore pushing it out further and less likely to fall within that 1 year? Also, whether an active program to locate a buyer has been indicated. And this could include the asset being put out to bid. So really, when you're thinking of larger assets, if you're trying to sell a building, you're usually not just going to be putting it out there and hoping that somebody's going to buy it. You usually are trying to locate somebody that might be interested in that purchase. Also, the market conditions for selling that type of asset. If you're in a down economy, you might not be having as many interested buyers that are going to be wanting to purchase that building. Also, any regulatory approvals needed for the sale. If there's a lot of hoops to jump through, are you going to be able to get that done within the year that this GASB 104 stipulates? We further need to consider evaluating if this capital asset is for held at every reporting period, and also looking at the other capital assets to see if there's any others that have popped up that are now going to be classified as held for sale. So doing that at every reporting period, and you need to continue to report it with their appropriate major class of assets. So you're still going to keep it within that building or wherever it needs to sit. But you're going to have a disclosure in the notes to the financial statements that's going to be talking about the historical cost, all the accumulated depreciation or amortization with the major class of asset, plus the carrying amount of the debt for which this capital asset held for sale is being pledged as collateral. So if you have like certificates of participation and you have a building that you have put up as collateral for that, you need to say how much is left on those certificate of participation. So if they originally were 15 million and now there's only a couple million left, you would need to put that in the note that the capital asset that's held for sale, the building, is being collateralized to this COP, which has a carrying amount of debt of X amount. So that's further explained here in the example of your note disclosure. An example would be included in capital assets are buildings that are capital assets held for sale. Those buildings are reported in the governmental activities. They have a total historical cost of $8 million and an accumulated depreciation of $5 million. And they are pledged as collateral for debt with a balance of $1.5 million. So this is the note disclosure that you would want to see if you do have a capital asset that's being held for sale. Now, one of the principles guiding the board, the GASB board, is setting the standards for accounting and financial reporting and looking at the assessment of the expected value and those perceived costs. And the board really strives to determine that its standard addresses significant user needs and that the costs incurred aren't going to be excessive and that they're going to be something that the benefit outweighs the cost in there. So the board did look at that with GASB 104, and they believe that this statement is going to be significant to the users of the financial statement. So it's going to be providing information about those certain capital assets and then really aligning the government so that it's more consistent and comparable on how they're reporting these capital assets. And then also they do believe that the perceived cost is going to be justified. So a lot of governments already have this information, and so it's not going to be too difficult for them to be able to put it into that note disclosure. They're going to have the historical cost, what the accumulated depreciation or amortization is. The only thing that might have some cost to it is determining the assets that are held for sale, and then also looking at what the carrying amount is of that debt if it is collateralized against any debt. So we're really looking at a couple of things here for improving the financial reporting. This is going to provide the users with that essential information about those certain types of capital assets. And like I said before, it's going to improve the consistency and the comparability between governments. You're going to be able to look at both of them side by side, and you're going to see those separate classifications and then the note disclosures that are going to be the same, so you can really compare between the two governments what they are doing in these areas. So our effective date for GASB 104 is effective for fiscal years beginning after June 15th, 2025, and all reporting periods after that. Earlier application is encouraged. So if you're wanting to learn more and read the whole statement, you can follow this link to get the full text for GASB 104. Again, thank you so much for joining me today on this Nano as we looked at GASB 104, Disclosures of Certain Capital Assets.